Jake Turner pulled into the driveway of his Houston home earlier than usual, the hum of his pickup truck fading as he cut the engine. At 38, he'd spent the better part of a decade keeping wind turbines spinning across Texas. Today, a delayed shipment of parts had given him a rare chance to clock out early, and he was eager for a quiet evening with Laura, his wife of 10 years. Their life wasn't flashy. Coffee in the morning, a cold beer after work, the familiar rhythm of their modest ranch-style home. But it was enough. Or so he thought, as he turned the doorknob. The muffled thump of music greeted him, not the usual silence. He stepped inside, and the scene hit him like a rogue wave. The living room was packed with strangers, their laughter sharp and out of place. Gold balloons spelling Laura floated against the far wall, glinting under the ceiling lights. Glasses clinked, voices buzzed with talk of markets and deals, and the air carried a polished energy Jake didn't recognize. This wasn't a casual get-together. It was a full-blown event, and he hadn't been clued in. Laura emerged from the crowd, her smile bright but practiced, like she'd rehearsed it in a mirror. She crossed the room and gave him a quick hug, her perfume unfamiliar, something sharp and expensive. "Stay calm," she whispered, her breath warm against his ear. "I'll explain later." Jake nodded, forcing a smile, but his stomach twisted. Explain what? Why was their home filled with people he barely knew, celebrating something he hadn't been told about? He scanned the room, tried to place faces. A few were Laura's colleagues from her finance firm, people he'd met at stiff company dinners. Others were strangers, their confidence and easy banter marking them as part of her world, a world that felt increasingly distant from his. Then he noticed him. Ethan Blake, Laura's life coach, stood near the center of the room, tall and self-assured, his presence commanding attention. Jake had heard about Ethan. Laura mentioned him occasionally, always praising his ability to unlock her potential. But seeing him in person was different. Ethan moved through the crowd with ease, shaking hands, laughing, his charm effortless. Too effortless. Jake grabbed a beer from the kitchen and leaned against the counter, watching. Ethan handed Laura a glass of red wine, commenting loudly enough for others to hear. "This one's bold, just like you've gotten." The crowd chuckled, but Jake's grip tightened around his bottle. Laura hated wine, or at least she used to. Well, had that changed? And why was Ethan the one pouring it for her, acting like he knew her better than Jake did? He tried to mingle, making small talk with a colleague of Laura's about turbine maintenance, but the conversation felt hollow. His eyes kept drifting to Ethan, who seemed too comfortable in their home. At one point, Ethan picked up a framed photo from a shelf, a picture of Laura at a conference, and commented on how far she'd come since then. The familiarity in his tone grated on Jake. How often had this guy been here? As the night wore on, Jake's unease grew. He stepped into the hallway to clear his head and noticed a book on the sideboard, its cover facing down. He flipped it over. The Power of Emotional Freedom, Redefining Your Relationships. The title hit him like a punch. Laura wasn't a self-help reader, at least not the Laura he knew. He opened the cover, half expecting to find her name inside, but there was nothing, just a pristine copy, like it had been left there deliberately. He put it back, his jaw tight, and returned to the party. Laura caught his eye from across the room, her smile faltering for a split second. Ethan was beside her, his hand brushing her arm as he leaned in to whisper something. She laughed, but it wasn't the unguarded laugh Jake remembered from their early years. It was polished, restrained, like a performance. Jake's chest tightened. He didn't belong here. Not in this crowd, not in this moment. The party dragged on, and Jake played the part of the supportive husband, nodding at compliments about Laura's success, shaking hands with people who barely registered his presence. When the guests finally started to leave, Ethan lingered, chatting with Laura by the staircase. Their conversation was light, almost intimate, like two people who shared a secret. Jake watched from the kitchen, his beer long gone, replaced by a glass of water he barely sipped. When Ethan finally left, Laura approached, her smile softening. "Thanks for being here," she said, her voice careful. "I know it was a lot." Jake nodded, his throat tight. "What was this all about, Laura?" She hesitated, then said, "Just a work thing. I closed a big deal last week. They wanted to celebrate." Her tone was casual, but her eyes didn't meet his. "Ethan part of that deal?" Jake asked, keeping his voice even. "No," she said quickly. "He's just been helping me stay focused. With work." She turned away, busying herself with stacking glasses. Jake didn't push. He was tired, his head swimming with questions he wasn't ready to ask. Upstairs, he showered, the hot water doing little to wash away the unease. He lay in bed, the faint scent of Laura's new perfume lingering on her pillow. For the first time in years, sleep didn't come easily. The house felt like it belonged to someone else. Jake woke to the faint smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen. The bed beside him was empty, Laura already up. He lay still for a moment, the unease from last night's surprise party clinging to him like damp air. He pulled on a t-shirt and jeans, his movements slow, deliberate, as if delaying the inevitable. Downstairs, Laura sat at the counter, scrolling through her phone, a glass of orange juice in hand. She glanced up as he entered, offering a quick smile, polished, mechanical, like a reflex. "Morning," she said, her voice light. "Sleep okay?" "Not much," Jake replied, pouring coffee. The mug was warm in his hands, grounding him. "That party still messing with my head." Laura's fingers paused on her phone. "It was a big night," she said, her tone careful. "Everyone loved it. People are still posting about it online." She turned her phone to show him a photo. Her with colleagues, all smiles, gold balloons in the background. Jake nodded, but his eyes lingered on the screen. Ethan Blake was in the next photo, standing close to Laura, their shoulders almost touching. "What was the party for exactly?" Jake asked, keeping his voice steady. He sat across from her, the counter a quiet barrier between them. Laura set her glass down, the clink sharp in the morning silence. "I closed a deal last week," she said. "A $2 billion acquisition for an international fund. My commission was $5 million. She spoke as if reciting a fact, no trace of excitement, no invitation to share in the triumph. "My team insisted on celebrating. I didn't think you'd be home, so I didn't mention it." Jake's grip tightened on his mug. $5 million. She'd tossed the number out like it was pocket change, not a fortune that could reshape their lives. He took a slow sip, letting the bitterness of the coffee mirror the thoughts swirling in his head. "And Ethan? What's his deal in all this?" Laura's eyes flicked to her juice, avoiding his. "He's not part of the team. He's just been helping me stay sharp, handling stress, making decisions. He's a professional, Jake. Highly respected." Her words were clipped, rehearsed, like she'd anticipated the question. Jake didn't respond right away. He chewed on a piece of toast, the act mechanical, his mind racing. Ethan's ease in their home last night, his casual intimacy with Laura, the way he'd commented on her taste in wine, it didn't add up to just a coach. And that book, The Power of Emotional Freedom, still nagged at him. Since when did Laura read self-help? Since when did she keep secrets? "You seem off," Laura said, breaking the silence. "What's wrong?" Jake set his toast down. "I fell out of place last night," he said, "like I didn't belong in my own house. Everything's changing, and I'm just catching up." Laura leaned back, her expression softening but guarded. "Things change, Jake. I'm growing, pushing forward. Sometimes that feels strange to people around me. It's not personal." She stood, placing her glass in the sink, signaling the conversation was over. Jake watched her move, her words echoing, growing, pushing forward. But where did that leave him? The Laura he'd met in college, laughing over cheap pizza, planning a simple life, felt like a ghost now, replaced by someone who spoke in corporate platitudes and hid behind polished smiles. He left for work, the hum of his truck a familiar comfort. At the wind farm, he buried himself in maintenance schedules, checking turbine blades and filing reports. But Ethan's face kept creeping into his thoughts, his easy charm, the way he seemed to know Laura better than Jake did. By lunch, he couldn't shake it. He opened his phone, scrolling through Laura's social media. The posts from the party were public, polished, professional. Then he saw it, a tag photo from a week ago, Laura and Ethan at a Dallas networking event, laughing over cocktails, their body language too close for colleagues. The caption read, "Building partnerships that inspire." Jake's chest tightened. That afternoon, an email pinged his inbox, an offer for a temporary job at a wind farm in Oklahoma. Good pay, 6 weeks, starting in 3 days. He'd turned it down twice before, not wanting to be away from Laura. Now the distance felt necessary, like a chance to breathe, to think. He replied, confirming his availability, and packed a bag that evening. Laura was out, a note on the counter saying she had a late meeting. He texted her about the job, heading to Oklahoma for work. Back in 6 weeks. Her reply came hours later. Okay, safe travels. In Oklahoma, the work was straightforward: tune-ups, inspections, the kind of problems Jake could solve with his hands and focus. But at night, in the dorm-style housing, his phone became a trap. A coworker mentioned seeing Laura in a post from a Dallas gala. Jake searched and found it. Laura and Ethan at a reserved table, clinking glasses, their smiles intimate, like they shared a private joke. Another post showed them posing with executives, but Ethan's hand rested lightly on Laura's back. The caption: celebrating achievements and connections that transform. Jake stared at the screen, his pulse quickening. This wasn't just a coach-client relationship. The photos, the captions, the way Ethan lingered in her orbit, it all pointed to something deeper, something Laura hadn't admitted. His messages to her were short, generic. How's work? Her replies were shorter. Busy. All good. No questions, no warmth. It was like their marriage had been shelved, and he was the last to know. He lay awake that night, the Oklahoma wind rattling the dorm windows. The job was fine, but his life wasn't. Something had to give. He didn't know what he'd find when he got home, but he knew one thing. He wasn't going to stay in the dark any longer. Jake's boots crunched against the gravel as he stepped off the plane in Houston. The Oklahoma job cut short by a decision he couldn't delay. The Dallas gala photos. Laura and Ethan Blake, their glasses raised, their smiles too close, had burned into his mind. He told the wind farm crew he had a family emergency, which wasn't far from the truth. His marriage was unraveling, and he needed answers, not more nights staring at his phone, piecing together a puzzle he wasn't sure he wanted to solve. He drove straight home from the airport, the late afternoon sun glaring off the windshield. Laura wasn't there. The house quiet except for the hum of the fridge. The silence felt like a chance to think, to act. He dropped his bag and headed upstairs, his steps heavy but purposeful. In the bedroom, he opened the closet and pulled out a cardboard box where they kept important papers, tax returns, warranties, the kind of stuff you forget about until you need it. His fingers brushed a blue folder he hadn't touched in years. He opened it, expecting old receipts, but there it was, their marriage certificate. Jake sat on the edge of the bed, scanning the document line by line. The words "total community of assets" jumped out like a neon sign. He'd signed it a decade ago, without a second thought, back when love felt like enough and money was just something to get by on. Now it meant something else. Laura's $5 million commission from the recent deal, plus the $8 million she'd built over years of bonuses and investments, $13 million total, was legally half his. The realization hit hard, not because of the money, but because it forced him to see the truth. Their life together wasn't what he'd thought. He tucked the certificate into his bag and opened his laptop, pulling up the social media posts he'd saved. The Dallas gala photos, Laura's guarded replies, Ethan's name tagged in too many events. Then he dug deeper, checking public records and financial apps Laura had left logged in on their shared tablet. A few clicks revealed transfers to an account linked to Ethan's consulting firm. Small amounts at first, then larger, totaling over $50,000 in the past year. Coaching fees, the memos read, but the frequency and timing felt wrong, personal. Jake's phone buzzed. A text from Laura, back late. Dinner with clients. No warmth. No questions about his early return. He didn't reply. Instead, he called Mike, a coworker who'd gone through a messy divorce last year. Mike gave him a name, Sarah Klein, a Houston lawyer who doesn't mess around. By evening, Jake was in Sarah's office, a no-frills space downtown. He laid out everything. The party, Ethan's familiarity, the marriage certificate, the transfers, the photos. Sarah leaned back, flipping through the folder, her expression unreadable. "You've got a case," she said, closing the folder. "Community property laws in Texas are clear. Half of her assets are yours, including that $5 million commission. The payments to Ethan could suggest interference in the marriage, maybe more. We'll need to move fast." She outlined the plan. File for divorce, demand half the $13 million, and use the financial trail to show Ethan's role went beyond professional. Jake nodded, his jaw tight. This wasn't about greed. It was about not being erased from his own life. Sarah worked quickly. By the next morning, she drafted the divorce petition, citing insupportability and listing Ethan's influence as a factor. She attached screenshots, bank records, and a copy of the marriage certificate. Jake read it over, the legal language cold but clear. He signed, his hand steady, though his chest felt like it was caving in. Sarah filed the papers that afternoon, and the process was set in motion. Laura got the notice 2 days later. Jake was at a coffee shop when she called, her voice a mix of shock and control. "Jake, what is this? Divorce? You're suing me?" She sounded like she was trying to negotiate a deal, not save a marriage. "We can talk this out. It doesn't have to be like this." Jake stirred his coffee, the spoon clinking against the mug. "You had months to talk, Laura. You chose not to. I'm just doing what's fair." She hesitated, then softened her tone. "I didn't mean for things to get so complicated. Let's meet, figure this out. No lawyers, just us." "It's past that," Jake said, his voice firm. "You know why?" He hung up, his heart pounding. He wasn't the same guy who'd stood quietly at her party, out of place in his own home. He'd trusted her blindly once, but not anymore. That night, he stayed in a hotel, needing space from the house and its ghosts. Sarah called with an update. Laura's lawyers had reached out, offering $1 million to settle quietly. "They're testing you," Sarah said. "They know you're entitled to $6, $5 million. We hold firm." Jake agreed, his resolve hardening. Laura's world was built on control, but she wasn't controlling this. Over the next few days, cracks started showing in Laura's polished life. A client pulled out of a $2 million deal, citing personal concerns. Ethan's name surfaced in industry chatter, his consulting gigs drying up as the lawsuit's details leaked. Jake didn't gloat. He didn't have it in him, but he felt a quiet strength. For the first time in months, he wasn't the one in the dark. He was the one setting the terms. Jake sat in the hotel room, the hum of the air conditioner the only sound breaking the quiet. His phone lay face down on the nightstand, silenced after Laura's last call, a plea to resolve this privately that rang hollow. The divorce papers were filed, the demand for half of her $13 million fortune clear, and Sarah Klein, his lawyer, was pushing forward with evidence of Ethan Blake's overreach into their marriage. Jake wasn't backing down, but the weight of it all pressed on him. He wasn't fighting for money alone. It was about reclaiming his place in a life that had slipped away. Laura's lawyers responded faster than expected. By noon the next day, Sarah called with their offer. $1. $5 million, a generous settlement to avoid a public battle. Jake listened, staring out the hotel window at Houston skyline, the city sprawling under a gray sky. "They're scared," Sarah said, her voice steady. "They know the community property laws. They're hoping you'll take the lowball to avoid a fight. We say no, $6. $5 million, or we go to court." Jake agreed, his resolve unshaken. He'd spent years trusting Laura's promises. He wasn't settling for scraps now. The refusal hit Laura hard. Sarah forwarded Jake a copy of an email from Laura's legal team, their tone shifting from confident to cautious. They requested a meeting to explore options, but Sarah advised against it. "They're stalling," she said. "We've got the upper hand, financial records, social media, Ethan's involvement. Let them sweat." Jake trusted her instincts. He'd seen Laura negotiate deals. She thrived on control. But this time, the terms weren't hers to set. Meanwhile, the fallout began to ripple through Laura's world. Jake wasn't tracking her every move, but news traveled fast in their circles. A colleague from the wind farm sent him a screenshot from a finance blog. A major client had frozen a $3 million contract with Laura's firm, citing instability in leadership. Another post mentioned Ethan Blake canceling a high-profile seminar in Austin, his social media accounts suddenly private. Jake didn't dig further. He didn't need to. The lawsuit, even in its early stages, was shaking the polished facade Laura and Ethan had built. Laura called again that evening, her voice less composed. "Jake, this is getting out of hand," she said, the words rushed. "You're ruining everything. My work, my reputation. Ethan's getting dragged into this, and he doesn't deserve it." Jake leaned back in the hotel chair, letting her words hang. Her concern for Ethan stung more than he expected. "We can still fix this," she continued. "I'll give you $2 million, cash, no questions. Just drop the case." Jake's jaw tightened. "You think this is about money?" he said, his voice low. "You hid things, Laura. You let him into our life, our home. I'm asking for what's mine half. That's the law, not a negotiation." He hung up before she could respond, his pulse racing. The call left him raw, but it also sharpened his focus. He wasn't the one who'd crossed lines. He wasn't the one scrambling now. Sarah kept the pressure on. She subpoenaed bank records, uncovering more payments to Ethan's firm, $75,000 over 18 months, labeled as consulting, but timed suspiciously with Laura's trips to events where Ethan appeared. Sarah also found emails between Laura and Ethan, shared through a work account Laura hadn't secured. They weren't explicit, but the tone, casual, familiar, flirty, suggested a bond beyond professional. "This strengthens our case," Sarah told Jake over coffee. "It shows Ethan's influence wasn't just coaching. We're close to forcing a settlement." The next blow came unexpectedly. A Dallas-based investment group, one of Laura's key partners, pulled out of a $4 million deal, citing ethical concerns. Jake heard about it through a mutual contact at a renewable energy conference. The contact mentioned whispers in the industry. Laura's personal life was becoming a liability, and Ethan's name was toxic. Jake didn't celebrate, but he felt a quiet shift. The world Laura had built, the one that had pushed him to the sidelines, was cracking under its own weight. Laura's lawyers caved a week later. Sarah called Jake to her office, sliding a document across the desk. "They're offering $6, $5 million," she said. "Full split of the assets, no further claims. Case sealed for confidentiality. Ethan's out of the picture. They're dropping him to save face." Jake read the terms, the numbers stark on the page. Half of Laura's $13 million, including the $5 million commission, would be his. The settlement also barred Laura from contesting the division later. It was exactly what he'd asked for. He signed the papers that afternoon, his hands steady. Sarah nodded, a rare smile breaking her professional demeanor. "You did this right," she said. "No drama, just the law." Jake thanked her, but as he left the office, the victory felt hollow. The money was his, but the life he'd known, the one where Laura was his partner, not a stranger, was gone. That night, Jake checked out of the hotel and rented a small apartment near the wind farm. He didn't go back to the house. Laura could keep it. He packed the marriage certificate and a few tools, leaving the rest behind. His phone buzzed with a final text from Laura. "I'm sorry it ended like this." He didn't reply. Apologies couldn't undo the distance she'd created, the trust she'd broken. He was done looking back. Jake leaned against the railing of a hiking trail outside Austin, the late afternoon sun cutting through the cedar trees. 3 years had passed since the divorce, since he'd walked away from Laura with $6, $5 million, and a quiet resolve to rebuild. Now, at 41, he was a lead instructor at a renewable energy training center, teaching young technicians how to keep wind turbines spinning. The work was steady, grounding, a far cry from the chaos of his old life. Beside him, Mia, his wife of 2 years, adjusted their 1-year-old daughter, Ellie, in a carrier strapped to her chest. Ellie giggled, grabbing at Mia's sunglasses, and Jake smiled. A real smile, not the forced one he'd worn for too long. The settlement had given him freedom, but it was moments like this, Sunday hikes, Mia's laughter, Ellie's tiny hand wrapping around his finger, that gave him purpose. He'd invested the money wisely, buying a modest home in Austin and setting up a fund for Ellie's future. The rest went into a small renewable energy startup, a side project with Mia, an engineer he'd met at a conference. Their life wasn't lavish, but it was honest, built on trust and shared goals. Laura's world, meanwhile, had shifted dramatically. Jake didn't follow her closely, but news trickled through mutual contacts. After the divorce, her career took a hit. The $4 million deal that collapsed during the lawsuit was just the start. Other clients distanced themselves, wary of the whispers about her personal life. Ethan Blake, her former coach, had vanished from the scene entirely. His consulting firm folded after clients bailed, and his social media went dark. Jake heard Ethan had moved to Chicago, chasing new ventures, but the damage was done. His reputation as a life coach was tainted, his name tied to the scandal he'd helped ignite. Laura herself stepped back from the finance world. The high-stakes deals, the glossy events, she let them go. Instead, she launched a YouTube channel focused on financial literacy for women, offering practical advice on budgeting, investing, and independence. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, with a small but growing audience. Jake stumbled across one of her videos by chance, shared in a group chat by an old colleague. In it, Laura sat at a plain desk. No makeup, no pretense, speaking directly to the camera. "I lost a lot chasing ambition," she said, her voice calm but raw. "I hurt people I cared about, and I paid a price. Starting over means letting go of who you thought you were." She paused, looking off-screen for a moment. "If you're watching this, Don't let success blind you to what matters. I did, and it cost me more than money. Jake watched for a minute, then closed the app. Her words didn't stir anger or bitterness, just a quiet acknowledgement. She'd faced her mistakes, or at least she was trying to. That was enough. He didn't need closure. He'd found it in his own way, in the life he was building now. Back on the trail, Mia handed him a water bottle, her eyes catching his. "You okay?" she asked, sensing his brief drift into thought. "Yeah," Jake said, taking a sip. "Just glad to be here." He reached out, brushing Ellie's cheek, and she squealed, kicking her legs. Mia laughed, and the sound loosened something in Jake's chest. This was his life now, simple, real, and his. Laura's channel grew over time, her videos gaining traction for their honesty. In one, a viewer asked how to rebuild after a major loss. Laura leaned forward, her expression steady. "You start by being honest with yourself," she said. "I try to control the story, my career, my choices, but life doesn't work that way. I lost my marriage, my reputation, because I thought I could have it all without consequences. You rebuild by owning your mistakes and choosing what's worth keeping." Jake didn't see that video, but a coworker mentioned it, saying Laura seemed different, humbler, grounded. Jake nodded, unsurprised. He'd seen her at her peak, all polish and ambition, and he'd seen the cracks form when it fell apart. She was finding her way, just as he had. His own path wasn't perfect. The startup with Mia had its challenges, supply chain delays, funding hiccups, but they tackled them together, late-night talks over coffee, turning obstacles into plans. Teaching kept him connected to the work he loved, and mentoring young technicians gave him a sense of legacy. Ellie was the heart of it all, her curiosity and joy a daily reminder of what he'd gained by letting go of what couldn't be saved. As the sun dipped lower, Jake and Mia finished the hike, Ellie dozing against Mia's chest. They drove home, the radio playing softly, the Austin hills fading into dusk. Jake glanced at Mia, her hand resting on his, and felt a quiet certainty. Life had pulled him through betrayal, through loss, but it had also led him here, to a family, a purpose, a second chance. Laura, in her latest video, ended with a line that stuck with her viewers. "You don't start over by erasing the past. You do it by learning what it's trying to teach you." For Jake, the lesson was clear. Sometimes, the hardest endings are the ones that show you what you're worth. He didn't need to look back to know he'd found it.